A major setback for U.S. President Donald Trump and efforts to overhaul healthcare in the U.S. Plus, Europe is on high alert after a terror attack outside London's Parliament. Hello, I'm Nathan King, filling in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. U.S. President Donald Trump has withdrawn his health care bill after it failed to gain enough support to pass in the U.S. Congress. The last-minute move was seen as a huge setback for Trump, who had promised to repeal and replace Obamacare, as it's called, from day one in office. Mr. Trump blamed Democrats for not supporting the bill and predicted the current program would explode.
We were very close. It was a very, very tight margin. We had no Democrat support. We had no votes from the Democrats. They weren't going to give us a single vote, so it's a very difficult thing to do.
So in our roundtable discussion, joining us from Beijing is Qinduo Xu. He is a political analyst with China Radio International. Here with us in the studio is Afshin Molavi. He's a senior fellow with the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. From Paris, we are joined by Leela Jacinto. She is a news reporter with France 24, France 24, and Brian Becker is the national coordinator with the anti-war and civil rights activist group Answer Coalition here in Washington, D.C. No particular order, but because you guys are in Washington, D.C., and Friday night we had this breaking news, Brian, big setback for Donald Trump. His first legislative push in his first 100 days, and it doesn't get passed?
Big, humiliating defeat for Donald Trump, because this was the mantra of Donald Trump during the whole 2016 presidential campaign. Besides build the wall, it was we're going to do away with Obamacare. Obamacare is a disaster. Just last week, he was in Kentucky, where, by the way, Obamacare helped a third of Kentuckians to get Medicaid for the first time, health care coverage. But he was all about this is going to happen. Even 2 days ago, he said, we're going to do this. He gave an ultimatum to the Republican Party. But the party itself is so splintered over such, I have to say, terrible bill, a bill that was deeply unpopular with the American people, he couldn't get it done. But it's not just health care. Mike Flynn, his national security advisor, he was forced out of office right away. The ban on majority Muslim countries from the 7, now it was 6 after Iraq was removed, also stopped by the U.S. courts. This has been a string of defeats, political defeats and legislative defeats and court-based defeats for Donald Trump in the first period of his administration. So the art of the deal, not so much.
You should be the host. That was a fantastic sum up. Afshin, internationally, how does this play? Because, you know, he's a deal maker, but he can't even deal with his own party 300 meters down the road in Congress.
Sure. Well, you know, it's welcome to Washington, right? I mean, he said in one of his statements, who knew healthcare could be so complicated, right? Well, healthcare is complicated, passing legislation is complicated, and the world is complicated as well. So, you know, if he thinks he's going to bring kind of the art of the deal, New York real estate style, into these kind of deals, I mean, he has another thing coming. Having said that, Nathan, I mean, look, this could be just a couple of weeks story. He's going to move on to the next deal, and the next deal is going to be tax cuts and tax reform. He'll probably have an easier time shepherding that through the Congress. And, you know, Washington, as you know, people have a short-term memory, and once he gets that victory under his sails, the pattern will be broken.
But it might add to the deficit. Anyway, this is for another show. Leela Jacinto in Paris, you have a wonderful healthcare system. I'm not just saying this. The UN always ranks France, you know, number 1, 2, or 3. You guys must be looking at this going, why can't America, the richest, most developed country in the world, deal with its healthcare? Is that how Europe feels? Is that how France feels?
Yeah, you nailed it. It's somewhere along the lines of what France thinks of America's failure to implement gun control or reform its electoral system. You know, the healthcare system is unfathomable. You know, in France, we sort of monitored the bickering over Obamacare, but you know, by the time you know the Trump plan rolled in, most French people were actually not paying attention, because it's simply one of those things that French men and women roll their eyes. They cannot see how you know, one of the world's most powerful nations nation cannot have simply affordable health care for everyone. We all understood that the Obamacare didn't come close to what France has in terms of really providing affordable health care to everybody. And this plan that Trump came up with was astonishing. I mean, of course, this has not got through. So, this has been pushed back for a while now.
Yeah, I grew up in England, and we have a national healthcare system. My sister is a doctor, and we outsiders tend to scratch our heads. America seems to be unique in terms of wanting the marketplace very much involved in its healthcare. Let's go to Beijing. Qinduo Xu, China is setting up a lot of welfare programs right now and shifting some of its welfare programs. What lessons could China learn from the way healthcare is done in the United States and elsewhere?
Well, I think China is looking at basically to provide a complete coverage for everybody living in this country, obviously. So that's basically is funded now, is over there. And if you go to the countryside, usually it's plural. Then the urban area, you can see if people get being hospitalized, they would only spend 20% of the fee. So the 80% of the fee will be covered by the state healthcare system. And of course, with this whole healthcare system, there are a lot of problems in the urban area. I guess for China right now is really about to provide more impetus for the private investor to come into the place. The healthcare system is wholly run by the government, and if you go to the hospital, almost like 100% of them are run by the government. Private hospitals, yes, there are, but only a very small percentage. So it's a more balanced system, I guess. That's China could learn from. Take a look at what happened in the U.S.
Yeah, I was recently in China, and the public-private partnership seems to be a way the government is going in a lot of areas. Let's switch topic. Just obviously the sad week in Europe, especially London, with the terror attack. It looks like on Westminster Bridge, and then following in Parliament. Just tell me, in terms. Sorry, Leela. Tell me in terms of how Paris felt, because obviously terror attacks very close to the center of Paris has happened in the last couple of years. There was the Eiffel Tower went dark. A reminder of what can happen in urban centers across Europe, right?
Well, Nathan, two things. One is, despite this famous animosity between the British and the French actually feel very close to the British, especially at a time like this, because, a lot of French people go to London. There is a train that joins London and Paris, so, we're back and forth. Also, there were 3 French students who were injured in the attack. These are students from a high school in Brittany. This Brittany, not the sort of place that is braced for terror attacks. So, in France, this was felt very acutely. Also, because some of the patterns that have come out of this attack is what we have seen in France, what we have seen in Belgium. This attack happened on the anniversary of the attacks in Brussels. And, there is a nexus that has been proven between the Brussels attackers and the French attackers. And at heart are all these issues that France has been grappling with for 2 years now, but not necessarily come out with any answers.
Afshin, what was your reaction to how the British reacted to this attack compared with what we've seen in terms of anti-terrorism measures of the Trump administration? To me, there was a real dichotomy.
There was a keep calm and carry on, wasn't it? But having said that, my initial reaction was, we've seen this before, and we're going to see it again. I mean, the biography of these individuals are very similar, whether it was the Berlin Christmas attackers or the Paris attackers or the Nice attackers. I mean, these are young men. The one in the UK was not young, but these are men who have backgrounds in violence, petty crime, many of whom came to religion later in life, some
Maybe
of whom
in prison.
are in prison, some of whom in this case was a convert. Everyone in life, Nathan, as you know, is looking for meaning in life. They've found some kind of twisted meaning in this form of jihad. And I'm afraid that this is something that we're going to see repeated over and over again in Europe. And I think it's going to continue to play a role in European politics. Just this last point, that statistic you hear about how you're more likely to die in a bathroom, bathtub accident than by terrorism. That may be true. But when someone dies in a bathtub, the policy doesn't shift. The world doesn't pay attention. And that's what what's wrong with terrorism is it changes everything around it.
Brian, that's a great answer, because I was going to ask Brian about that. The reaction in terms of the world's media always explodes, but then these attacks do happen from time to time. What do you think this attack tells us about the way forward?
Well, the way forward is extremely important, because the way forward presented by Donald J. Trump is not the way forward, because according to Donald Trump's ban on people from Muslim-majority countries, this individual, Adrian Russell, that was his British name before he took on the other name, he could have come to the United States because he wasn't coming from Syria, or he wasn't coming from Libya.
Or be born here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you caricature, when you stereotype, when you try to deal with racial or religious profiling as the way to stop terrorism, even if it's a random madman who says he has some affiliation with ISIS, maybe he has none at all, or ISIS says he's a soldier, but who knows it? But here we react by playing into racial, religious bigotry and stereotyping, and that doesn't keep anybody safe.
So, you know, there's been this big debate in the Obama administration and also in Europe. Do you treat this as crimes or terrorism?
Right now, we don't really know, but clearly it's a crime. Clearly, it appears to be a kind of terrorism. But again, what do? Do you spend another $500 million on airport security in the United States and ban people from 7 or 6 Muslim-majority countries? Is that what's going to keep Americans or Brits safe? Absolutely not. That's just a ludicrous, it's a boogeyman, but you know what? There's a lot of money involved, and there's a cottage industry making money off of this kind of sensationalized coverage of these kind of terrible attacks.
You mean the security industrial complex post-9/11?
And it's a big one. Literally, they've spent $500 million in the last few years.
Qinduo Xu in Beijing, China is no stranger to domestic terrorism. We've seen the headlines, Xinjiang province included. How does China react to these events? Is it more like what we saw in the UK, or is it more like we see in the US or elsewhere?
Well, right, for some of the Chinese, they would see it's, partly we see the chaos in the Middle East and in Syria, in Iraq, and you can go back to Iraq war probably, and some of the terrorism you would blame partly on the international policies, on the foreign policies from Western countries, sometimes from the U.S., from Britain, France, like the toppling of the leaders in Libya, in Syria, the efforts over there, will create more problem. But when it comes to China, China is working obviously very closely with Russia and the Central Asian countries, including Afghanistan and Pakistan. China is focusing more on the economic side. I know people would say, poverty is not the reason that leads to terrorism, but at least is a part of the reason probably. It contributes to the rise of terrorism. So China is focusing on the Belt and Road system, basically working with Afghanistan, with Pakistan, there's the economic corridor between China and Pakistan, and also investment in the infrastructure system in Afghanistan. That will create jobs. We have to boost the living standard of the people. So hopefully young people will focus on their own personal lives instead of seeking this meaningful life by being radicalized by Islamic extremism over there.